The morning sun was just starting to crawl over the horizon when I pulled up to my land in rural Texas. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and soft pink, the kind of sunrise that makes you stop for a second and appreciate where you are. My truck rumbled to a halt beside the old mesquite tree near the entrance, and I stepped out into the crisp, quiet air. This land had cost me years of saving, months of searching, and more stress than I'd ever admit, but standing there, boots in the dirt, it finally felt real. I dropped the tailgate and started unloading fence posts, coiled wire, and the post hole digger. Every clank of metal felt like progress. Today was the day I would finally mark the boundaries of what was mine. No more people cutting across it. No more wondering if someone would claim a corner of it. It was time to build something permanent. As I set the first post down, I took a long look around. The open field stretched as far as my eyes could see. The wind pushed through the grass in lazy waves. A few cows grazed way out on the neighboring property, barely paying attention to anything but breakfast. A hawk circled overhead, crying out once before disappearing into the rising sun. For a moment, everything felt perfect, peaceful, quiet, and full of possibility. I took a deep breath, letting the warm smell of dirt and cedar fill my lungs. This was exactly the life I had imagined when I decided to buy land in Texas: wide open space, full control, and no one telling me what to do. Little did I know, within hours, a helicopter would land on my property and turn that piece upside down. I pushed the post hole digger into the ground, twisting it into the soft Texas dirt, when I noticed something strange. Fresh tire tracks, deep ones, the kind made by a heavy truck or off-road vehicle. At first, I thought maybe they were mine from last week, but the tread was different and far too clean to be old. Curiosity got the best of me. I followed the tracks slowly, wiping sweat from my forehead as the morning sun climbed higher. The trail led me across the center of my land, curving in ways that didn't make sense. It didn't follow any fence line or logical path. Whoever drove through here wasn't sightseeing, they were heading somewhere specific. That's when I spotted it. Near the far edge of my property lay an old gate, one I had purposely left standing when I purchased the land. It wasn't fancy, but it marked the boundary between my acreage and the neighboring lot. Now it was torn down, lying on the ground with fresh dents, like someone rammed it with a truck. The hinges were ripped clean off. A few splinters of wood still hung from the posts. My stomach tightened. Who had been here, and why? I crouched down to look at the tracks again. They came straight from outside the property, looped near the fallen gate, and then continued deeper onto my land before disappearing into the thick brush. As I stood there, trying to make sense of it, a low rumble echoed across the fields. It wasn't a truck, it wasn't thunder, it was deeper, like a giant engine cutting through the air. I looked up toward the horizon, shielding my eyes. A small black dot was moving fast. Too fast. Something was definitely off, and whatever it was headed straight for me. The black dot in the sky grew larger with every passing second. The rumble turned into a full-throated roar that vibrated through the ground and shook the tools in my truck bed. I stepped back, squinting against the glare of the sun, trying to figure out what in the world was happening. Helicopters didn't just fly this low unless they were searching for something, or someone. The aircraft swooped over the far ridge, dipping down into my property like it had been aiming for me the entire time. Dust shot into the air. My hat nearly blew off. The grass bent flat under the force of the rotor wash. The wind stung my face as I held my arm up to shield my eyes. It wasn't a news chopper. It wasn't a rancher's helicopter. This was military style. Matte black, no markings, no bright colors. Just silent authority in metal form. It dropped lower and lower until it hovered barely 10 feet above the ground. Then, with a sudden blast of air, it settled onto my land, as if it had every right to be there. The side door slid open with a sharp metallic snap. A man jumped out. Boots. tactical pants, a heavy vest, a radio strapped across his shoulder. He walked with absolute purpose, like he was trained for moments exactly like this. I stood frozen, gripping my shovel like it was the only thing anchoring me to the earth. The helicopter blades were still spinning behind him, chopping the air so violently I could barely hear myself think. Then he stopped right in front of me. The wind died down just enough for him to speak. And when he did, his voice was calm, but firm enough to shake me to the core. "Stop immediately," the man shouted over the fading thunder of the helicopter blades. I froze. My hands were covered in dirt, shaking slightly from the sudden adrenaline rush. All I could think was, what did I do? I hadn't crossed a fence line. I hadn't trespassed. I was literally working on my own land. "You need to put the tools down right now," he said, stepping closer with authority that didn't belong to a random visitor. I slowly set the post hole digger on the ground. The man pulled a thick folder from a waterproof case strapped to his side. He opened it and flipped through several pages of maps, satellite photos, and documents stamped with government seals I didn't recognize. The wind whipped through the papers, but he had a firm grip on them. This wasn't his first field mission. "You're fencing the wrong land," he said bluntly, tapping his finger on a satellite image. "According to updated coordinates and the new federal boundary survey, half of the fencing you're preparing to install falls inside a restricted buffer zone." I blinked. A restricted what? He handed me one of the high-resolution images. My jaw dropped. The lines marking my property had shifted slightly, just enough to create overlap. It didn't look real. Property lines don't move. Land doesn't just change hands without someone telling you. "This area behind your property," he continued, "is part of an active federal operation. Access routes must remain clear at all times. Your fence would interfere with that." My anger simmered. "No one told me about any of this." "They're not supposed to," he said. "But you still can't build here." The helicopter engine started revving again. He gave me one last warning. "If you keep fencing this section, more than just a helicopter will show up next time." As the helicopter blades slowly picked up speed again, I stood there clutching the documents the officer had given me. My mind was spinning. None of this made sense. I had bought this land legally. I had the paperwork. I had the survey. I even had county approvals. So how could some unseen operation override everything? The officer motioned for me to follow him toward the helicopter. The wind kicked up dust around our boots as we walked. Near the open door, he leaned closer to speak without shouting. "Look," he said, lowering his voice, "I'm not supposed to disclose details. But you need to understand something. The area behind your property isn't just empty land. It's part of a transportation corridor we use for specialized operations. Times have changed. Security policies have changed. And this zone is classified for reasons I can't explain." "Classified," I repeated. "On my land." He looked at me with a mix of sympathy and finality. "Unfortunately, the buffer zone predates your purchase. The updated mapping just made it visible. Your previous survey missed it. It happens more than you think." Before I could respond, the helicopter pilot signaled that it was time to go. The officer took back the folder, leaving me with only a single sheet showing the new boundary overlay. "Cooperate, and you won't have any problems," he said. "Build anywhere else you want, but not on that zone." With that, he stepped back into the helicopter. The door slid shut. The engine roared. The rotor wash blasted me with another wave of hot air. Within seconds, they lifted off and disappeared over the ridge, leaving me alone in the settling dust. I stared at the torn gate. The fresh tracks. The shifting boundaries. My land wasn't as simple, or as private, as I thought.